that I found very odd reading this was retroactive classification of things as secret. How can something that wasn't secret, that was out there, suddenly be classified?
Mm-hmm. The government used every means at its disposal to try to suppress information that might help Sibel win her case. The most obvious tool it used, which is very rare, of course, is the state secrets privilege. But it also had let me say that again. But it also tried to, and in fact did for a period of time, retroactively classify information that the FBI had provided to Congress about Sibel's allegations. Now, this was just remarkable to us. We couldn't believe it. And it did this specifically to support its argument that the whole case needed to be kicked out because of the state secrets privilege. In other words, it said in its papers to the court, oh, everything about this case is a state secret. You know, it would jeopardize national security for it to get out. And then it looked in the congressional files and saw, oh shoot, the FBI in fact provided a lot of information to members of Congress in unclassified sessions. And so the only way that it could, support its argument that the whole case involved state secrets information was to try to retroactively classify the information that had been provided to Congress in public sessions. And that, in fact, provoked an entirely separate case, which was filed by the Project on Government Oversight, which wanted to distribute information about Sibel's case and which went into court to challenge the retroactive classification. And after months of litigation in that case, right before there was going to be a hearing, before a judge, they backed down. And they decided, oh, you know what, never mind. It's not retroactively classified after all. We can see that you can distribute it again. And so it was just the whole case, this back and forth and these kind of nutty, arguments that they would make in an effort to suppress information. And they would claim every time that the secrecy was necessary to protect national security, but at every turn it looked very clearly as if the real reason for the secrecy was to cover up their own embarrassment and their own wrongdoing.
It's just remarkable. There's a new initiative that I think Congresswoman Maloney is also going to be telling us about whistleblowers in general. Talk to me a little bit about what Sibel has been doing about protecting whistleblowers.
Just broader, yeah. Sibel formed the first coalition ever, I think, of national security whistleblowers around the country. This is a really remarkable endeavor, and it started bit by bit. She started to have informal discussions with other whistleblowers who would hear about her case and would contact her and kind of empathize over this horrible experience, to not only not be supported in trying to fix a problem that you identify, but actually get fired for identifying it. And I was, in fact, at one of the early meetings that led to the development of this coalition in Washington, in which Sibel had invited many other former FBI whistleblowers. So it was very specific to the FBI. And these are whistleblowers that, spawned a number of years. Some of them had these incidents, years ago. And it was really kind of amazing because it was very clear that none of them had ever been in the room together, certainly, and had never even talked, most of them, to one-on-one with other whistleblowers. And so it started to have this feel a little bit like kind of an AA support group, but it was for FBI whistleblowers. And of course, I was in a particularly funny situation, because who would have thought that there would be this ACLU lawyer sitting there with, in a room full of former FBI agents and translators and all. But it was pretty remarkable, and they quickly identified, in telling their stories, the same pattern again and again and again of what the FBI would do whenever a whistleblower would try to speak out. And again, it was from those early meetings that Sibel had with different types of whistleblowers that she came up with this idea of forming this National Security Whistleblowers Coalition, which has now really been quite active in pushing for legislation in Congress to provide better protections for whistleblowers. Currently, and I'm sure you'll hear more about this from the members of Congress, even though there is a law called the Whistleblower Protection Act, it is virtually worthless. It provides essentially no protections whatsoever for employees that work in certain kinds of federal agencies, namely those agencies that protect national security. And so any of those employees, if they do in fact speak out about security breaches or other problems, wrongdoing, they have no recourse whatsoever if they're fired for doing that. Now that seems completely backwards to me, because if there were ever a group of employees that the public certainly has an interest in hearing from if something goes wrong, it is, employees that work for agencies like the FBI and the CIA and the Homeland Security Department, etc. I mean, American people have the right to hear if these agencies, which are supposed to be protecting us, aren't doing their job, and yet there's no legislation that protects whistleblowers' right to tell us that information.
It's clear that you really find her a patriot.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to find some way to ask you a question that can elicit that.
Sure, yeah, something like that, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is kind of what it's all about, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sibel Edmonds is an American patriot. She has a classic story to tell, which is the story of an immigrant who came here seeking more freedom and seeking a real democracy, and was unfortunately kind of shut down when she tried to exercise her rights under the First Amendment. But again, like a true patriot, she didn't just shut up. She went public and she organized, and she is determined not to kind of give up and to assume that we no longer have these freedoms here in America, but to stand up and fight for them and invite others to join her to fight.
Terrific. That was beautiful. That's exactly what I was looking for. Is there any other angle of this case that I haven't asked you something about that you wanted to point out?
Oh, there's so many things. Let me just think if there's any other kind of clever little thing that I could tell. I mean, I didn't say anything about the fact that we then, but you can probably just tell that story about the fact that we then, when we lost at the Court of Appeals, went on to the Supreme Court. Do you want something like that? And then the Supreme Court shut her down too?
Your
or
reaction to the Supreme Court.
Yeah. After the Court of Appeals affirmed the lower court's decision to kick Sibel's case out of court, we were determined and did in fact go to the Supreme Court. We didn't stop at just filing a petition for review on behalf of Sibel, but we in fact organized a number of individuals and groups to file briefs in support of Sibel's case in an effort to encourage the Supreme Court to take the case. And we were really quite hopeful. Again, everything about the case had seemed so remarkable. We just couldn't figure out why it was that we were just running up against a brick wall with every court that we went to. And we thought, well, the Supreme Court's going to be the last shot, and maybe they'll see the value in giving Sibel her day in court, which she deserves, just like everyone does who has had, a wrong done to them. But unfortunately, even though we had so much support for her case, the Supreme Court ultimately decided not to review the case. And so that was the last stop. Again, I don't think any of us are feeling permanently defeated on either the specific issue of the use of the state secrets privilege to keep people out of court, or on the issue of better protections for national security whistleblowers. And that sense of hope, especially given what happened with this particular case, which is quite devastating, is all due to the work of Sibel Edmonds herself. I mean, she refuses to give up. And if she's not going to give up, I don't think any of the rest of us will. And we'll keep pushing in all of these different ways, through litigation, through advocacy in Congress, through organizing, to make us all safer and protect our fundamental freedoms.
Terrific. Good. You got it. Thank you, Ann.
Sure.